They said loving someone with a fractured mind was like holding water. You could feel its shape, but not its weight. I learned that truth the afternoon I met Gabriel, his sketchbook open on a sunlit bench in the park, fingers stained with charcoal and uncertainty. He looked up as I passed, eyes bright with a question I didn't yet know how to answer. "Do you see her too?" he whispered, voice tremoring on the breeze. I glanced at the empty space beside him. A girl in a pale dress hovered there, invisible to everyone but Gabriel. "I see you," I said, and in that moment his relief was so absolute, I offered my hand without thinking. We spent that afternoon chasing light. Gabriel drew people I couldn't see, a fire eater with coal black hair, a child pulling at his sleeve, even the moon reflected twice in a nearby pond. He talked to them softly, and I learned to listen for the space between his words where reality faded into something fragile and vivid. Days turned into evenings of laughter and shared sandwiches, nights of hushed phone calls when the shadows pressed too close. Sometimes in the quiet, his hand would jerk halfway to mine, caught by a voice I couldn't hear. His smile would shatter, and he'd apologize for drifting away. I'd brush his hair back and whisper, "I'm right here." He was diagnosed months before we met. Schizophrenia, they said, a lifetime of unwelcome visitors in his mind. At first, I studied books to understand what he faced: hallucinations, paranoia, the pull of voices he couldn't ignore. But every chapter I read felt inadequate next to the living, breathing man beside me. So I stopped reading and started asking him what he needed. One rainy evening, Gabriel called me in panic, footsteps echoing in his apartment, a stranger rat-tat-tatting on the walls. I rode the bus through empty streets, heart pounding, and found him crouched in the hallway, arms wrapped around himself. "They won't stop," he gasped. "They want me to disappear." I knelt beside him and held his trembling hands. "They can't see me," I said, voice steady, "but I can. You're not alone." He sobbed into my shoulder as thunder rumbled overhead. I stayed until the storm passed, brushing away tears, humming the lullaby my mother taught me. Gradually his breathing slowed, and the voices receded like a tide going out. In the months that followed, we built rituals to anchor him. Morning walks in the park where he sketched the same oak tree until its bark was etched in his memory, playlists of songs that soothed his restless mind, reminders scrawled on sticky notes, tiny promises of truth when the world warped around him. I loved Gabriel not in spite of his illness, but because of it. His mind was a kaleidoscope of wonder and terror, and learning its patterns was the greatest adventure of my life. When he laughed at something only he could see, I laughed too. When he cried for the friends who lived in his head, I held him and wept alongside him. One spring morning, I found him painting on our balcony, a portrait of us beneath a sky of swirling colors. His brush trembled as he signed it, "For the one who loves my every shade." I pressed a kiss to his cheek and whispered, "Thank you for painting me into your world." Gabriel smiled, a steady, real smile, and reached for my hand. "With you," he said softly, "I am whole." And I understood then that love isn't about curing the unseeable, nor silencing the unheard. Love is about standing in the storm with someone, offering your hand, and saying, "I see you, I choose you, always." They told me love was simple. Two hearts beating the same song. But loving Martin meant learning to dance to a melody all his own. I met him in the courtyard of the art center, paintbrush in hand and eyes that saw colors no one else could name. His laugh echoed like wind through tree boughs, wild, unexpected. I was drawn to him the moment his gaze settled on mine, soft and curious, as if he were reading a secret I hadn't even whispered. Martin told me stories of worlds half hidden, a city of glass spiders, a carnival where moonlight played violin, a child he once rescued from shadows no one else perceived. Sometimes his voice trembled at the edges, as though his thoughts were skimming the surface of something deeper, something dark and vast. When that happened, he'd stare at his trembling hands, and I'd wrap my own around his, grounding us both. We spent mornings wandering galleries, afternoons sipping tea in sunlit rooms, evenings sprawled among pillows while he sketched the dreams that woke him at midnight. He painted laughter in bright strokes and sorrow in quiet grays. I watched him move between colors so effortlessly, even as the lines between reality and imagination shifted beneath his feet. One night, he vanished into the city's humming streets. My calls went unanswered. I retraced our footsteps through moonlit parks and empty sidewalks, until I found him on a rain-slick bench, hands pressed to his temples, eyes rimmed with fear. The voices were back, urgent, relentless, and he looked at me as if I were both anchor and storm. I didn't flinch. I knelt beside him and whispered, "I'm here." He curled into my arms, weeping for a world only he could see. I stayed until dawn, listening to the storm with him, murmuring promises that he was never alone. When the sun rose, his tears were stilled by exhaustion, and he looked at me with trembling gratitude. "You love me," he said, voice raw, "even when I'm lost." "I love every part of you," I told him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, "even the pieces you think break you." In the days that followed, we learned new rhythms. I learned to read the shifting patterns of his thoughts, when to let him swirl in creativity and when to guide him back to quiet ground. He learned I would wait through the dark hours, a steady light he could come home to. Love, I discovered, wasn't about matching someone step for step. It was about learning their steps. The sudden leaps into imagination, the stumbles when reality bit too hard, the fragile pauses before they found their footing again. One spring afternoon, Martin led me to the gallery where our first painting hung, his portrait of me, eyes luminous with wonder. Beside it, a new canvas trembled on its easel, our story woven in color, a figure standing steady amid swirling light and shadow. He took my hand, the brush still damp with paint, and pressed it into mine. "For all the worlds you give me," he said, voice thick with emotion, "and for staying when I wandered away." I smiled, tears bright against the gallery lights, "for teaching me how to love the song no one else hears." And there, surrounded by paint and promise, we danced, two hearts learning a melody that belonged only to us.